Hello everyone, a very good morning and welcome to Byjus Exam Prep. Welcome to the daily Hindu News Analysis. So let's begin today's discussion by first looking at the articles that I have chosen from the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper. Today we have plenty of articles in the newspaper and I have chosen 3 articles for a detailed discussion. Followed by this, we have plenty of prelims related articles. So in total, we have 11 articles from today's newspaper. So let's cover all these topics one by one. And if you guys are liking the initiative, do support us by pressing the like button, share your comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. So let's begin with the first article from page number 1. There is an explosive development in the India-US relations. It has been reported that the US Department of Justice has indicted an Indian official for allegedly being involved in an assassination plot targeting a Khalistani terrorist. Now this is indeed an explosive story. It was initially broken by a few Western media outlets like Financial Times and the Washington Post, but now it is official. The US DOJ has pushed for the filing of charges at a lower court in New York, accusing an Indian intelligence operative of working with an organized criminal network in order to target a Khalistani terrorist. The target allegedly was Gurpatwant Singh Pannun, who is a proscribed terrorist in India. Now, why is this article relevant for the exam? That is what we need to understand. Now, given the sensitivity of the issue, given that India has denied any such involvement in assassination plots, UPSC is unlikely to ask a direct question on the topic. But however, these developments, not just with US but also with Canada that occurred recently, brings up the question of covert operations on foreign soil. You need to understand what is the role of covert operations in protecting India's national security. Why do intelligence agencies engage in covert operations? And you should also know the need for intelligence reforms. Now, for a second, if we assume that these allegations are to be true, the allegations made by US and previously by Canada, if we assume them to be true, despite India's denials, it raises very serious questions about operational inefficiencies by Indian intelligence agencies. Such covert operations are meant to remain covert. If a foreign government has found direct link with evidence connecting these assassins who are non-state actors, including organized criminals, with Indian state actors, then that defeats the very purpose of a covert operation. It raises questions on the efficiency of our intelligence agencies and brings up the need for intelligence reforms in the country. So these are the topics which can be relevant for the exam, along with the raging Khalistan movement, where we are seeing a revival of the Khalistan movement posing a threat to India's security, and how these developments could affect India's friendly ties with US. We've had similar discussions regarding India-Canada relations a few weeks ago, when Canada alleged that India was involved in the assassination of Nijjar, Hardeep Singh Nijjar, a leader of a terrorist outfit. Now, similar allegations have been brought up. It's not just an allegation anymore. US has pushed ahead with the indictment. The Department of Justice has filed charges, and it has even specifically pointed out that an Indian intelligence operative was involved in this alleged operation. Now, let's get into the details of the case. Let's understand what exactly the allegations are, what has been India's response, and then talk about the need for covert operations in general and India's policy on covert operations in the past and today, and also the need for intelligence reforms in the country. Now, according to these reports, according to whatever information is available publicly, we can deduce that the US is alleging the involvement of India's RAW in these assassination plots. The target of this particular plot was Gurpatwant Singh Pannun. You can see him in the image over here. He's the leader of a Khalistani terrorist organization known as Sikhs for Justice, or SFJ. This outfit has been involved in anti-India activities. Pannun has openly called for separatism to break Punjab away from India. He's called for the revival of Khalistan movement in India and abroad. And recently he had issued threats to the Cricket World Cup being hosted in India. He issued open threats to Air India flights as well, coming out from US and Canada towards India. He has given an open call for separatism and terrorism against India, and the SFJ is a banned terrorist organization under the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act. And Gurpantwant Singh Pannun is a proscribed terrorist. India has proscribed him as a terrorist under the UAPA. Now the allegation in the US is that there was an Indian plot allegedly involving Indian state agencies, which is most likely a reference to the Research and Analysis Wing, which is India's foreign intelligence agency. So the allegation here is that an Indian intelligence operative, most likely deputed from the CRPF, because in the charges that have been filed at the New York court, at the lower court in the US, they have not mentioned the name of the Indian intelligence operative. They refer to him only as CC1, as an intelligence operative deputed from CRPF, most likely to RAW, and he was handling intelligence operations for India. Now, according to this allegation, this individual, who is an Indian state actor, an Indian government official, was in touch with a person by the name Nikhil Gupta, who is a organized criminal. Nikhil Gupta, who is largely based out of Europe, is known to be involved in drugs trafficking, arms trafficking, and as well as in hit operations or targeted assassinations, essentially in contract killings, where criminals assassinate few targets for money. The allegation made by US is that this individual, Nikhil Gupta, who is a known criminal, approached an individual in the US trying to hire him as a hitman to assassinate Gurpantwant Singh Pannun. But as it turns out, this hitman who was allegedly hired by Nikhil Gupta was a US agent. He was an agent of the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Authority. The US was most likely tracking the operation. It laid a trap to get hold of Nikhil Gupta involved in the assassination plot. Now the question is, why does the US take this so seriously? If Gurpantwant Singh Pannun is a designated terrorist in India, and if India-US are close strategic partners, how come US is so serious about pursuing the case and even alleging that India is involved in such illegal operations? The reason is, Gurpantwant Singh Pannun is a US citizen. He has acquired US citizenship. He is based out of the US. And no foreign country will tolerate any such killings on their soil, that too of their own citizens. No country will tolerate foreign government sponsored covert operations where their citizens or people residing in their country, they are targeted through such illegal assassinations. This raises several legal and diplomatic challenges. It's a case of American sovereignty being breached by India if the allegations are to be true. So this US agent, the DEA agent, the Drug Enforcement Agency agent, he would go on to collect direct evidence implicating Nikhil Gupta and his connections with a handler from India. According to the US reports, the state actor from India who was operating from India, the alleged Indian intelligence operative, was the handler of Nikhil Gupta. Apparently, a big sum of money was also paid to execute the contract killing, but Nikhil Gupta and others involved in the plot, according to the allegation, they weren't aware that the hitman that they were hiring was actually an American undercover agent. So this is what most likely exposed the entire plot. And in fact, these concerns were expressed by the US to India many months ago. This is a story that goes back to May-June 2023. Since June 2023, since US uncovered this plot, it has been raising this issue at the highest level, including the US President Joe Biden. He personally brought up this issue with Prime Minister Modi according to several verifiable reports. Then top US officials, including the Secretary of State, the CIA chief, and the National Security Advisor of the US, have visited India multiple times and raised this issue directly with Indian authorities, pointing out the concerns they have about these alleged Indian operations on American soil. It was after the uncovering of this plot that evidence connecting Indian agencies with Niger's assassination in Canada came up. When Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau made a similar alarming allegation that Indian agents were involved in the assassination of Niger on Canadian soil, who by then was a Canadian citizen, right? Canada said it had sufficient evidence shared by its Five Eyes partner to implicate Indian agencies in the assassination plot. So now it appears that the evidence that Canada was talking about clearly came from this case in the US regarding the assassination plot involving Gurpantwan Singh Pannun, where US had uncovered the plot with evidence linking the operation with an Indian intelligence operative. Now these are the allegations of US and of course Canada as well. It is one side of the story. Now what is India's stand on this? Well, how has India responded? As we know, India has denied any such involvement. India has said we are not involved in such assassinations on foreign soil. We don't have a policy of such covert assassinations. India has said it's ready to cooperate with them if they are ready to share evidence with India. And recently, the Ministry of External Affairs announced that a high-level committee has been constituted in India to investigate these allegations regarding the involvement of Indian intelligence operatives with criminals in the assassination plot targeted against Khalistani terrorists. Now, this raises the question regarding the need for covert operations. Are covert operations legal? Why do countries engage in covert operations? Are they essential? How do they help a country? That is something you need to understand. See, any major country which is worth its salt and any credible intelligence agency of that powerful state will and must engage in covert operations. Covert operations are nothing but secret operations, which you don't acknowledge, which don't exist officially. Intelligence agencies, both foreign and domestic intelligence agencies around the world, they specialize in such covert operations. Covert operations, they serve a number of purposes. A covert operation is not just about targeted killings and assassinations. A covert operation could help you get hold of classified information, to get hold of classified intelligence that could serve our national security interests. Now, let's say, for example, if Pakistan is trying to procure advanced weapons from China, now that is very critical intelligence that would be needed for Indian agencies and Indian armed forces. So, collecting such classified intelligence through foreign sources, through intelligence operations, right, is a part of covert operations as well. Intelligence gathering and collection is also part of covert operations. But sometimes this could escalate to the extent of assassinations and even targeted killings, including acts of sabotage, acts of creating unrest, then acts of manipulating elections in a target country, or even attempts to build public opinion and influence in foreign countries. So any country, any major country, and any reputed intelligence agency worth its salt will be able to conduct such covert operations. They will have such covert capabilities that they would have built. Be it the CIA of the United States, the ISI of Pakistan, India's RAW, Israel's Mossad, the SVR of Russia, the Chinese intelligence, MI6 of Britain, all these major countries, they will be involved in covert operations to collect classified information, to even carry out sabotage, unrest, even going to the extent of sponsoring terrorism, even getting involved in manipulating elections, public opinion, and exerting influence in other countries. going all the way till carrying out targeted killings and assassinations. This is the bread and butter of most intelligence agencies in the world. So of course, these covert operations are entirely illegal because it marks a breach of sovereignty of the other country, right? It has no legality under international law. So that is why when covert operations are unraveled, and if your operatives are caught, and if there is a direct link made with the state agencies, it is going to create very serious legal and diplomatic challenges. It's not only embarrassing for the country when your operations are exposed, but it raises questions about the credibility of the country itself. Because when intelligence agencies work with organized criminal cartels, they could be involved in drug trafficking, arms trafficking, and in worst case scenarios, they'll be involved in terrorism as well, or at least they'll have connections with terror groups. So getting exposed on these operations is a huge embarrassment for any country or any intelligence agency. Because these operations are meant to remain covert, they're meant to remain secret. So if they got exposed, it means your operational planning, your operational tactics weren't good enough. They weren't efficient enough, which means you have to look inwards, look at how your intelligence agencies are functioning. But to answer the question why covert operations are needed, they help a country protect its national interests. Sometimes in geopolitics, you are not able to protect your national interests through diplomatic methods. And going to war or resorting to military option may not be a viable choice. So that is where countries rely on their intelligence agencies, their foreign intelligence agencies, to run such covert operations to protect the national interests of the country. From counterterrorism to spying on target countries, which might even include friendly countries. Even friendly countries spy on each other, right? They might try to destabilize each other, or hostile countries might engage in such covert operations. But the essence of any covert operation is the element of plausible deniability. A covert operation should be planned and executed in such a way that the government should always be able to plausibly deny its involvement, meaning there should be no direct evidence available that will link the operation with state actors. This is the core principle of any covert operation. The element of plausible deniability is everything. This is how a government can deny responsibility and avoid international action and legal action. Now, the fact that US has been able to generate evidence linking Indian actors, state actors with a possible assassination plot raises very serious questions about India's covert operations. See, in the past, India has resorted to such covert operations. Of course, today, we don't have much information as these operations remain classified and secret. But at least in the past, we have some verifiable records through which we can say that India also has been involved in such covert operations. For example, in the 1980s, when Khalistan movement was raging, India's RAW had indeed carried out such covert operations, carrying out targeted killings of Khalistani extremists and trying to break the links of Khalistani terror groups with the ISI by running such covert operations in Pakistan. Now, how do we know about this? A very popular intelligence officer from India, B. Raman, who was an IPS officer, he has written in his book, The Cowboys of RAW, detailing some of India's past intelligence operations. They were declassified. The government did not withhold the book or the release of the information as it was very old information which wouldn't affect our current ties and priorities. So in the book Cowboys of RAW, B. Raman talks about RAW's covert operations in Pakistan which were authorized by the then Rajiv Gandhi government. In order to break the Khalistan movement, RAW had apparently set up two covert teams, CIT-J and CIT-X, to conduct such targeted killings in Pakistan, targeting Khalistani extremists and to break Khalistani links with the ISI. There are many such covert operations of India, including the support that RAW extended to Mukti Bahini rebels in East Pakistan in the run-up to the liberation of Bangladesh war in 1971. Then allegedly RAW has been involved in training, arming and funding the LTT in Sri Lanka in the 1970s and 80s. So sometimes intelligence agencies do resort to such covert operations in order to protect the national interests of the country, the security of the nation and the interests of the nation. It's not just India, every other country, every other major power would do the same. From Israel to Russia, from UK to US to China to Pakistan. All the major powers will engage in such covert operations. So there is indeed a need for covert operations in geopolitics. But however, the question is about efficiency of these operations. What is the tradecraft being followed by the intelligence agencies? How effectively are they concealing the state links? Because you can't have state agencies being connected with criminal groups and terrorist groups. That weakens our own fight against terrorism. Tomorrow, if we allege Pakistan for being involved with drug and narcotic cartels and terrorist organizations, Pakistan will point the finger back at India, saying that India was involved as well with criminal organizations, with connections with other cartels and terror groups. So that is the reason why your intelligence agencies have to be extremely efficient when it comes to such highly classified covert operations. These operations are not supposed to become public, at least for a certain period of time. And especially the connections with the state actors should remain concealed. And this is part of the tradecraft of an intelligence agency. It depends on how they operate, how they recruit, how they train, and what tactics, operational tactics they use to cover the links between state and non-state actors. Now that serious allegations have been raised against Indian agencies, particularly the RAW, and both US and Canada have pinpointed Indian officials. They've identified them by name as well. At least in their own internal documents, they have identified the Indian officials involved in these alleged assassination plots. Now, this raises very serious questions about the very efficiency of our intelligence agencies. In fact, this has been a long-standing concern. Even though Indian intelligence agencies have done a remarkable job in countering terrorism, in protecting India's national interests, there have been many cases, especially in the last few years, where several operations have gone wrong, raising the need for more accountability of the intelligence agencies. Now, in the case of India, this has always been a problem. If you look at our intelligence agencies like RAW or even IB, they are accountable only to the government. They are not accountable to the parliament or to the public, because they are set up through government resolutions. RAW is set up under the cabinet secretariat, reporting only to the national security advisor and the prime minister. IB functions under the home ministry, reports to the home minister and as well as national security advisor and the prime minister. So Indian intelligence agencies are accountable and answerable only to the government. There is no parliamentary oversight over Indian intelligence agencies. Now, if you compare this with other democracies like US or UK, things are slightly different. In the US Senate and Congress, they have select intelligence committees that have oversight powers over intelligence agencies and their operations to ensure accountability. In UK as well, there is parliamentary oversight where the intelligence committee of the parliament can keep check on the functioning of intelligence agencies. If a similar thing were to happen in the US or UK, by now heads would have rolled, because the members of the intelligence committee would have summoned the chiefs of the intelligence agencies, questioned them, grilled them as to what went wrong. Right? Accountability has to be fixed. Price has to be paid if mistakes were made in such critical operations. And it's not the first time it is happening. There was another incident in the Caribbean where a disastrous attempt was made allegedly by Indian agencies to abduct a wanted criminal. You would have heard about a fugitive economic offender, Mehul Chokski. Apparently, an attempt was made to kidnap him from the Caribbean island to bring him back to India, to render him back to India, to make him face justice. While the operation is justified from an Indian perspective, the fact that the operation got blown and got exposed with some connections with Indian state agencies raises questions about the efficiency of our intelligence organizations. The case involving Kulbhushan Jadhav in Pakistan, where credible connections have been made regarding his involvement with India's RAW, also exposes India's covert operations in Pakistan, raising questions about the tradecraft of RAW. The recent espionage case in Qatar, where former Indian naval officers have been delivered the death penalty for allegedly spying for Israel, also raises serious questions. Now, this is where we need to look inwards as well. The question of more accountability of our intelligence agencies, the process of recruitment into our intelligence agencies and their training. Now, if you look at the recruitment of Indian intelligence agencies, there is a major flaw that exists. At the lower level, there are few exams conducted. For example, for Assistant Central Intelligence Officer of the IB, exams are conducted, but the identity of these candidates who clear the exam goes public even before they enter the agency. At the higher levels of these agencies, if you look at IB and RAW, and if you look at the higher level vacancies that are filled, they are filled from the Civil Services exam conducted by the UPSC, which you guys are attempting for. So IPS officers and sometimes even IRS, IFS, and from other cadres, officers are drawn on deputation. Then even from armed forces and paramilitary forces, from Indian Army, Indian Navy, and paramilitary forces like CRPF, BSF, etc. Officers are brought on deputation to work for RAW and IB, that too handling key assignments. Now, the problem with this method of recruitment, which is a very outdated method of recruitment, is that the identities of these officers is already in the public domain. And in the world of covert operations, identity of the officer is everything. In a digital world, if you can't protect the identity of your officers, foreign agencies will easily pick them out. Since the data is already there in the public domain, for them it's easy to keep track of who might be joining Indian intelligence agencies after they join the government services. This is a highly flawed method of recruitment in India because this doesn't happen in almost any major country. In other major countries, be it US or even China or even, let's say, UK or even Israel, they recruit intelligence officers at a very young level, and from the beginning their identities remain covert, remain classified. Right? They assume false identities, work under assumed cover, thereby protecting the very integrity of the operation. But in the case of India, the identity of Indian intelligence officers who will be posted abroad is exposed from the very beginning, as they're drawn from UPSC Civil Services exams and other public exams that are conducted. So this is a major flaw in recruitment which has never been addressed in India. Same goes with training, the tradecraft that is imbibed to them, and also the level of motivation. Because these officers who come on deputation, they have no long-term motivation to work with RAW. They come for 3 years or 5 years assignments and go back to their parent cadres. Now, that is not how you build a professional intelligence agency. To build a professional intelligence force, you need dedicated officers who grow in their career from the bottom to the top. So those who are recruited directly, they have no career progression, as all the top positions are taken off by the IPS and other cadres which are more influential. And those who come on deputation like IPS officers, they only come for temporary postings. So you cannot build professionalism, you cannot build expertise in such matters of intelligence operations. So this is where major flaws exist in India's intelligence agencies, and that is why there is a long-standing demand for intelligence reforms in India. So these are the key issues raised by this development, and UPSC might ask a question on these lines. In fact, questions similar to this has already appeared in the mains examination under internal security. Now let's move on to the next article. In the front page itself, there is another important development, a very big development related to Northeast insurgency. According to the article, the government of India and the government of Manipur, they have signed a tripartite suspension of operations agreement with a faction of UNLF. Now this topic is related to Manipur insurgency. I hope you know that insurgency in Manipur is one of the long-standing insurgencies that has affected the northeast of India. Insurgency in Manipur has raged from 1960s till date. It's one of the longest standing insurgencies, and this group, this notorious terrorist group, the UNLF, is one of the oldest insurgent groups of northeast India. Now, if you look at Manipur, which has recently witnessed major ethnic violence, the roots of insurgency in Manipur traces back to the ethnic divide in Manipur. If you examine the events of 1950s and 1960s, which gave birth to insurgency in Manipur, it is a direct result of the ethnic divide between the major communities here, with Meiteis from the valley on one side. The Meitei community is the most dominant community in Manipur. They belong to the erstwhile Manipur Royal Kingdom. They are in larger numbers. They are mainly found in the Imphal Valley region. So Meiteis are the dominant class. And there are few hill tribes with whom they have a conflict. This includes the Nagas and the Kuki-Zo or the Kuki-Zom community. See, post-independence, Meiteis felt they lost out by joining India. The Meitei royals were initially hesitant to merge with India as they perceived that they would lose their autonomy and independence, which they had enjoyed under the British. Later, when the hill tribes, that is in the hill regions of Manipur, the Nagas and Kuki-Zom community, they were given scheduled tribe status. They were given reservation. They were given special protection. Their land, their identity, their culture would receive special protection as these communities were recognized as the hill tribes, as the scheduled tribes of the region. These hill tribes got the ST status. So Meiteis felt that India was discriminating against them, and they started a separatist movement against India. A separatist insurgent movement was started by insurgent groups like UNLF, the People's Liberation Army, and the others. These were the Meitei-based insurgent outfits of Manipur. They primarily operated in the valley, and they had a presence across the region, including across the border in Myanmar. So UNLF has been a major insurgent group along with the PLA. These are Meitei-based insurgent groups, and they have been waging a war against India from several decades. They have been fighting a separatist war to break Manipur away from India, to make Manipur a separate independent nation. They have tremendous cross-border support across the border in Myanmar. They have bases where they can hide. They can easily source drugs, weapons, and funds for their terror operations. And apparently they have connections in Myanmar with the military junta as well. According to India, the UNLF also apparently had contacts with Chinese intelligence. So the cross-border support coming in from Myanmar has always enabled UNLF to act against India, and it has carried out major attacks against Indian armed forces. So this has been a persistent problem for India in Manipur. After several decades, especially because of the special powers under AFSPA and the effective counter-insurgency operations conducted by Indian Army and Assam Rifles, insurgency in Manipur had gone down at least after 1990s. From early 2000 and in the last 20-25 years, insurgency had definitely gone down and declined, mainly because of the effective security operations of India. But in the last few months, I'm sure all of you know about the flare-up that has happened in Manipur. Right, the ethnic flare-up again between Meiteis and the Kuki-Zom community is tied back to the origin of insurgency in Manipur, which goes all the way back to 1960s. So in this context, striking a suspension of operations agreement with UNLF is indeed a very, very big development for India. Is that clear? Now let me provide some more clarity on this. The UNLF was formed in 1964 under the leadership of Arambam Samarendra Singh. The demand of UNLF has always been separatism, to break Manipur away from India. This group later underwent a split. In early 2000, the founder of this insurgent group was assassinated. After his killing, UNLF broke up into different factions led by Pambai and Koireng. Two leaders of UNLF, they broke apart because of their different ideology and objectives. The Pambai faction and the Koireng faction. These are the two major UNLF factions that exist today. Is that clear? Now this outfit is a proscribed terrorist organization under UAPA. The Home Ministry has designated all factions of UNLF as terrorist organizations under the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act. These insurgent groups have a strong support base in the Sagaing region, Chin state and Rakhine state of Myanmar, with patronage coming from Myanmar's military junta itself. So there is tremendous cross-border support. UNLF also has ties with other ethnic groups in Myanmar, with criminal cartels and insurgent groups in Myanmar. So from the Golden Triangle region of Myanmar, it has been easily sourcing drugs, weapons and funds to continue operating against India. But now UNLF has come under pressure because recently India has extended the designation of these factions as terrorist outfits. And in Myanmar, there is a big crisis going on where the military junta is facing a significant attack led by various ethnic armed groups and the People's Defense Forces, the pro-democracy forces. So the weakening support for Northeast insurgents in Myanmar and India's stepped up pressure, security and intelligence pressure, has been pushing some of these groups to surrender. In the past, we have worked out peace accords and brought permanent peace. In Mizoram, for example, India struck a similar deal with the MNF, the Mizo National Front, which was an insurgent group, a designated terrorist group. Through the Mizo Peace Accord of 1986-87, the MNF surrendered and entered mainstream politics. And today it has formed government, the state government in Mizoram. We have signed peace accords with Bodo outfits as well. We have signed 3 Bodo peace accords to end Bodo insurgency in Assam. Right? So similarly, India has a track record of signing such peace accords with various insurgent groups to settle these conflicts forever. So now, the government of India, along with the government of Manipur, they have signed a suspension of operations agreement, meaning it's a ceasefire agreement. The details of the agreement remain classified as it's a sensitive document, but reports are indicating that the agreement signed with UNLF yesterday, with one faction of UNLF, is a suspension of operations agreement, meaning Indian forces will no longer target this faction of UNLF which has surrendered. In return, UNLF will also not target Indian forces. Both sides will suspend their operations and they will bring all their cadres to a camp, and all the arms and weapons they have, they will be monitored by Indian authorities. Is that clear? Indian authorities will keep a check on the militants of UNLF. They're supposed to reside in a camp that will be set up, surrender all the arms and weapons, keep them within the camp, which is under the supervision of Indian authorities. Now, based on this ceasefire or suspension of operations agreement, a final peace accord will be worked out. This is a general process of conflict resolution that India has followed in the Northeast. We have done the same with Mizo insurgency, with Bodo insurgency. We are doing the same with Naga insurgency as well. Even with Nagas, at least some faction of NSCN, the Isaac Muiwa faction of NSCN, we signed a suspension of operations agreement in 2015. With other insurgents like Ulfa of Assam, India has signed suspension of operations agreement. And currently we are negotiating peace accords with the Naga insurgents and also with Ulfa. So on similar lines, one of the oldest insurgency in the region, led by UNLF, is being brought to an end, with one major faction surrendering by signing the suspension of operations agreement. So this will begin the process of a peace negotiation, and a final peace accord might be worked out very soon. Is that clear? But please note, it's only one faction which has signed the agreement, the Pambai faction, led by K. Pambai, which has been always open to talks with India. The other faction, led by Koireng or R.K. Achau Singh, remains opposed to any talks with India, and it remains in a state of war with India. So all factions of UNLF have not surrendered. It's only one faction, the K. Pambai faction, which has surrendered and signed the suspension of operations agreement. The other faction, the Koireng faction, has refused to talk to India, refused to negotiate with India. But still, it's a very big development, as it could bring Meitei insurgency to an end. There are other Meitei insurgent groups. There are other valley-based insurgent organizations. But at least resolving the conflict with one faction of UNLF will still be a major success. We can further build upon this and bring all Meitei insurgent groups back into mainstream politics. So that is why this is a very big development as far as India's internal security is concerned. Now coming to an important editorial on page number 8. The editorial deals with the Model Code of Conduct, which is implemented by the Election Commission of India to regulate elections in the country and to ensure the conduct of free and fair elections. As you know, under Article 324 of the Constitution, the Election Commission of India has a constitutional mandate to enable the conduct of free and fair elections, which is the very bedrock of Indian democracy. In order to ensure that political parties and candidates don't resort to unethical methods and illegal methods during election campaigns, and to restrict some of the powers of the government during elections, there is a code of conduct which is in place called the MCC, the Model Code of Conduct. So the editorial is focused upon the Model Code of Conduct. So first, let's understand what is a Model Code of Conduct, just a brief background and a brief idea about what is the Model Code of Conduct, and then I'll discuss what the editorial is pointing out. The Model Code of Conduct is a set of guidelines issued by the Election Commission to regulate political parties and candidates in the run-up to elections, both state elections and general elections. This can be traced back to the state assembly elections of Kerala that was held in the year 1960. The evolution of this model code, which is a code of conduct for the political parties and the candidates, traces back its history, its origin, to the 1960 state elections of Kerala. That was the first time that the Election Commission brought out a set of guidelines to be followed by political parties and candidates. This was later mainstreamed in 1962 during the then Lok Sabha elections. Then in 1991, following repeated violation of guidelines by various parties and candidates, the Election Commission further refined the Model Code of Conduct, and since then it has been strictly implementing it. And the credit largely goes for then Chief Election Commissioner T.N. Seshan, who was a feared election commissioner by various political parties and leaders. He was known for his integrity and his fair approach towards all parties and leaders. And the strict action that Election Commission started taking from 1990s led to the implementation of the moral or the Model Code of Conduct. Now, this Model Code of Conduct kicks into effect once the election dates are announced. Once the election schedule is notified, either for State Assembly or Lok Sabha, immediately the Model Code of Conduct kicks into effect. It remains in operation till the results are announced. That is the period during which the Model Code has to be followed by the political parties and the leaders who are campaigning in elections. This Model Code basically promotes an ethical code of conduct. It prohibits, restricts and regulates certain kinds of activities by parties and candidates. For example, political parties and leaders, they cannot seek votes in the name of caste, religion, etc. That is prohibited. If elections have to be free and fair, there should be no undue influence on the electorate, either by the ruling party or even by the opposition candidates. They cannot seek votes in the name of caste and religion. They can't engage in hate speech targeting a particular caste or a religious community. Is that clear? They can't seek votes in the name of God, in the name of faith. That would be an exercise of undue influence. They can't personally defame their opponents. They can't abuse their opponents personally. Candidates and parties can criticize the policy, the ideology, the previous track record and performance of other parties and governments. That is allowed in an election, but they can't resort to personal attacks. They can't defame another leader. They can't personally target a leader. Is that clear? They can't resort to hate speech, which might incite even violence during elections. They can't promote majoritarianism by targeting minorities. They can't seek votes in the name of caste, religion, etc. Now, this is prohibited when the Model Code of Conduct is in force. Next, there are many other restrictions. I'm just giving you an oversight. With regard to public meetings, rallies and campaigns, the parties and leaders have to inform the local police before so they can make the necessary security arrangements. They can't just impromptu carry out a rally or a campaign without informing the police. If they do that, the Election Commission will take action against them. With regard to processions, rallies, there are restrictions. If two different candidates or parties are planning processions and rallies on the same route, they have to ensure they inform the police, the Election Commission, and ensure that the route and the time does not clash. Because when two opponents come together, there could be a violent exchange that could escalate into major violence that could disrupt elections. Right? So there are restrictions regarding processions, campaigns and rallies, and even burning of effigies is also prohibited. Then on the election day, to ensure the integrity of the polling booth, to prevent booth capturing or any targeted attacks against the polling booth, there are many restrictions on political parties and candidates. For example, no political leader or members of a political party are allowed within a certain distance of the polling booth. They can put up cams at a certain minimum distance. They can issue identity slips to the voters, but these slips that they give, it should be on a white paper. It should not contain the party symbol or the name of the candidate or the party, so that there is no undue influence on the voter right before the election. And there are many restrictions on the party in power at the state level and also at the national level. For example, the ruling party members can't misuse the government machinery for election campaign. They can't ask government officials to promote government policies during elections. They can't use the public money for their campaigns. They can't use public media like Doordarshan, the public radio and other platforms the government will have. They can't use official media to just carry out political propaganda for the ruling party. That is prohibited. They can't announce any new schemes or implement new initiatives designed to influence the voters in an undue manner. The governments in power have a leverage which opposition parties won't have. If they announce populist schemes, cash benefits programs and other populist measures, if they announce it during the election period, it will unduly influence the voter and it will never give a fair chance for the opposition party. So all such unfair practices are regulated by the Model Code of Conduct. But however, Model Code of Conduct is very controversial. It has not been very effective because despite all the restrictions, all these practices are done by our parties and leaders. They still seek votes in the name of religion, in the name of caste. They target minorities. They resort to populist politics. They announce these SOPs, these populist schemes designed to attract the voters. Right? They resort to hate speech against each other. They personally target their opponents as well, resorting to personal attacks. Despite this, the Election Commission has not been able to act and enforce because the MCC itself is not legally enforceable. Please remember this point. The Model Code of Conduct is just a code of conduct. It's just a set of guidelines notified by the Election Commission. It has no legal backing. There is no parliamentary law that provides for legal force to the Model Code. Only some provisions can be enforced legally by drawing similar provisions from IPC, CRPC and Representation of People Act. If the Election Commission wants to act against a party or a leader for violating the code, they have to invoke the relevant provisions from the Indian Penal Code, the CRPC and the RPA. Without that, MCC has no legal backing and as a result, it becomes very difficult to enforce these guidelines. In fact, a parliamentary standing committee in 2013 had recommended to make MCC legally binding by including it as part of Representation of People Act. But the Election Commission is against it because if it is made legally enforceable, then many cases will reach the courts which could delay and disrupt the electoral process itself. Now please remember, electoral process is insulated from judicial proceedings to an extent, right? If election cases reach the court all the time, it could lead to very long delays which could disrupt governance, disrupt democracy itself. So Election Commission is against making Model Code of Conduct legally binding because then it will come under judicial review and these judicial proceedings could delay the whole electoral process itself. The other major criticism here is that Election Commission has not always acted in an unbiased manner. You can see that in the recent state elections that are currently going on. That is what the editorial is talking about. Recently, multiple states have headed towards assembly elections, from Telangana to Madhya Pradesh and many others. I'm sure you would have witnessed the high-pitched political campaigns by all the major parties, and many parties and leaders have been punished and penalized by the Election Commission. From BJP to Congress to small regional parties, every party has been punished by the Election Commission in some way or the other for violating the Model Code of Conduct. But however, in certain cases brought up against the Prime Minister and the Home Minister, Election Commission has not acted according to the editorial. There have been certain allegations where the Prime Minister and Home Minister have allegedly violated the Model Code of Conduct in their campaigns. And apparently the Election Commission has not acted against them, thus raising concerns about the lack of fairness in the functioning of the Election Commission. Now don't forget, recently the Supreme Court tried to intervene in the appointment process of the Election Commission. The Supreme Court gave itself a role by creating a appointment committee which would include the Chief Justice of India along with the Prime Minister and the leader of the opposition to appoint the Chief Election Commissioner and the 2 election commissioners. But the government has reversed this historic judgment through an amendment. The government brought out an amendment which was enacted by the Parliament, and now the entire appointment process to the Election Commission is fully controlled by the government. Appointing the Chief Election Commissioner and the election commissioners has now become the discretion of the ruling party, of the government of the day, with no role for the Supreme Court or other independent bodies. So now that the Election Commission and its appointment process has largely come under the government's control, there are more serious concerns about the conduct of free and fair elections. When such questions come up, that the Election Commission is not acting fairly, that it is leaving out certain individuals, it's not punishing them, taking action against them, despite similar charges against other leaders as well. Right? This raises serious questions about the very independence of the Election Commission and the free and fair conduct of elections in the country. Now, apart from this criticism, the other major criticism about the Model Code of Conduct is that it interferes with governance. Because every now and then, every few months, there will be some election or the other in the country. Right? In some state, and finally at the national level, there will be elections. So essentially, India is in constant election mode. Political parties, leaders are in constant election mode. So since Model Code of Conduct keeps coming into effect every now and then, it affects the ability of the government to govern, to come out with welfare schemes, to implement government initiatives, to launch new programs. The ruling parties face a challenge because of the implementation of the Model Code of Conduct. So there is a criticism that it interferes with governance. So these are the various arguments in favor and against of the Model Code of Conduct. But the core point the editorial is highlighting is that Election Commission should function in a free and fair manner. It should visibly be unbiased. Irrespective of who the leader is, which party they are from, it should be seen to be acting in a fair manner against all complaints and charges where the Model Code allegedly has been breached. There should be a more even treatment to ensure that elections are free and fair in the country. So that is the core point the editorial is making. So with this, I complete my detailed discussion of all the important editorials and columns. Now we proceed to the prelims section. We'll take a quick look at the smaller articles in the newspaper. On the front page, we have an article referring to India's recent stand with regard to a UN resolution against Israel. Recently, a draft resolution has been brought up at the UN General Assembly criticizing Israel's occupation and illegal settlement at the Golan Heights. Golan Heights is a disputed area between Israel and Syria. This is where the region is located. During the 1967 war, the Six-Day War, Israel captured the Golan Heights from Syria, and this region remains under Israeli occupation. Most of Golan Heights is under Israeli control. Only a small part of it is under UN control, as you can see here in the map. You can also see the Sea of Galilee, which is a major water body here that feeds the Jordan River, which further drains into the Dead Sea. These are important locations given the Israel-Palestine conflict. So Israel captured the Golan Heights in 1967 from Syria and remains in illegal occupation of the Golan Heights. Along with illegally occupying Golan Heights, Israel has been pushing settlements. It has been pushing illegal settlements into Golan Heights, which is Syrian territory essentially. Now the global community, at least many countries, are critical of this, so they pushed a resolution criticizing Israel's continued occupation and its illegal settlement in the Golan Heights. Now India, interestingly, has supported this resolution, meaning we have voted against Israel. Now recently, given the escalation in the Israel-Hamas conflict, India has fine-tuned its position on the Israel-Palestine conflict, and we have been balancing our position where on certain key areas we are backing Israel. When it comes to targeting Hamas, fighting against terrorism, we have backed Israel. We abstained from one such UN resolution which called for a ceasefire. India abstained from that, extending support for Israel for its war against Hamas. But in other resolutions, where Israel was criticized for its illegal occupation and settlements in Palestinian territory in Golan Heights, India has voted against Israel. So this shows the balanced position that India takes on the conflict. And it is of great importance to note that India has backed this resolution against Israel, which criticizes Israeli occupation of the Golan Heights of Syria. Next, on the same page, we have an update from COP28. As we discussed yesterday, the COP28 is all set to begin in Dubai, and the chief of COP28, Sultan Al Jaber, who is the president designate of COP28, has made a big announcement. He has said that during COP28, major petroleum companies and oil companies, they have agreed to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. This is a very important communication. We might see an official agreement coming out by the end of the summit. All the major oil gas companies, according to the COP chief, they have committed to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050, to basically achieve net zero emissions of carbon by 2050 and achieve net zero methane emissions by 2030. I hope you understand what do you mean by net zero. It's about matching the emissions with carbon sequestration. For the equivalent of greenhouse gas emissions released, the equivalent of that should be absorbed through better technology, through better carbon capture, carbon sink technologies. The oil petroleum industry contributes significantly to greenhouse gas emissions. Apart from burning of fossil fuels, the very process of extracting fossil fuels, the operations involved in the petrochemical industry itself accounts for 15% of total emissions. The process of exploring, extracting the oil reserves, refining it, turning it into various petrochemical products, this collectively accounts for 15% of global emissions. So if these oil gas majors, if they achieve net zero emissions in carbon by 2050 and in methane by 2030, this will be a big achievement. It could go a long way in addressing the concerns regarding climate change. So let's wait and watch whether it will be officially announced. This is just an informal announcement by the chief of COP28. Maybe by the end of the summit, an agreement might be brought out where private companies, this would be the first time that major oil and gas private companies will be taking up such a global commitment to achieve neutrality, net zero emissions by 2030 and 2050. So that is why it's a big development. We need to keep a watch on this. Next, on page number 6, we have a very important and an interesting article. It's an article referring to the world wars, the Second World War to be particular, and the interesting connection between India and the United States during the Second World War. See, when the Second World War was raging, the Allied powers, as you know, were involved in a brutal combat with fascist forces around the world. The Allied powers led by US and West European countries, they were fighting against Nazi Germany, Mussolini's fascist Italy, and fascist Imperial Japan. right? India was a major contributor in the war efforts. Both in First and Second World War, India contributed men, material, resources and money to fuel the war efforts. During the Second World War, between 1942 and 1945, something interesting was happening in China. The Chinese Civil War had broken out. Until then, China was ruled by the Republic of China, the Kuomintang Party, the KMT, under the leadership of Chiang Kai-shek, was the ruling authority in China, in mainland China. But Republic of China was being challenged by the Maoists. The Communist Party of China, led by Mao Zedong, had adopted an aggressive, violent approach to capture state power. Mao Zedong had mobilized the farmers, peasants, workers and laborers to rebel against the Chinese state, to throw out the Chinese state and capture power to bring communist rule in the country. During this conflict in China, the civil war had broken out. The Allied forces led by US, they tried providing armed support, weapon supplies and material supplies to support the Republic of China led by Chiang Kai-shek, the leader of Taiwan. Eventually, in the civil war, Republic of China was defeated. The Maoists won the war. The Communist Party captured control of mainland China under the leadership of Mao Zedong. So, Republic of China and the KMT, the Kuomintang Party, led by Chiang Kai-shek, they were outcast to Taiwan, which is the source of the China-Taiwan dispute even today. So back then, the Americans made an effort during the World War to arm and provide supplies to the Republic of China and Chiang Kai-shek, and these operations were carried out via India. Is that clear? The US Air Force, along with the Royal Air Force of the UK, they ran several flights. Their Air Force transport flights would run several missions via Northeast India into the Yunnan province of China. Is that clear? Thousands of missions were carried out by the US Air Force, where they would supply weapons, material and other support to support the Republic of China in its fight against authoritarian communism. Is that clear? So during these flight operations, US Air Force faced a big challenge. Because as you know, in the Northeast India, the geography, the topography is very challenging, very complex. So the route they were using to fly the planes was via Assam, Arunachal Pradesh, into then Burma, which is today's Myanmar, then further into the Yunnan province of China. This is Yunnan province of China. These are the routes that the flights were taking. But here, the US Air Force faced a big challenge. Many aircrafts, they crashed in the notorious terrain of the Himalayas and the dense forests and jungles of Northeast India. That is why the US Air Force designated this route as the Hump Air Route. The Hump Air Route. Meaning the mountains create a hump which is difficult to navigate. And there are deep gorges, dense forested areas, high mountains. And as a result, 650 aircrafts belonging to US Air Force crashed. Most of them in Assam and especially in Arunachal Pradesh. Hundreds of American pilots were killed. And the remains of these pilots and aircrafts, they remain even today in Northeast India. In the remote forests and mountains of Arunachal Pradesh and also in parts of Assam, the remains of these World War era aircrafts and American pilots, their remains, their body remains are still left behind. So the US has made it a priority to retrieve the remains, and as part of this collaboration between India and US, they have set up a museum. The US ambassador inaugurated a museum on airmen in Assam to pay tribute to the American pilots who were involved in this operation. It also marks a link between India and US during the World War effort. It points out the difficulty faced at the Hump Air Route. In fact, in this air route, there were two different routes taken. One was the low hump route via Calcutta, East Pakistan, Myanmar and Yunnan. But the more preferred route was via Northeast India, from Assam to Arunachal to Burma and Yunnan. This was the high hump route. This is where most of the aircraft crashes happened. Is that clear? So it marks a historical link between India and US, and it also highlights the role India played in some way or the other during the World War efforts. On the same page, the Hindu carries an image of these beautifully carved wooden elephants in Bangalore. And these wooden elephants that you see here, these are artifacts, these are sculptures which have a artisanal purpose. They have been crafted by using a very unique wood, that is the Lantana camara, which is an invasive weed, which is an environmental nightmare for India. Is that clear? The wood through which these elephants have been carved, it comes from an invasive alien species called Lantana camara. Many of you would have seen this particular plant. It's found all across India today, right? Especially in southern India and also in central and eastern parts of India. This particular wooded plant is widely prevalent. But believe it or not, this is not indigenous to India. It's not native to India. It came from the outside. This plant, that is Lantana camara, it's a native weed belonging to South America and Central America. It's of South American, Central American origin, and it is a weed. It spreads uncontrollably. It destroys the good plants, takes over entire ecosystems. Such a deadly invasive weed species entered India in 1809. And since then, it has taken over multiple ecosystems in India. That's why invasive alien species are dangerous for ecosystems and biodiversity. Invasive alien species. It does not refer to extraterrestrial beings from outer space. No, it does not. It refers to species, plant or animal species, flora, fauna species which are not native, not indigenous to a particular region. So when such foreign species enter, and if they are invasive, if they spread uncontrollably, if they take over the whole ecosystem, they can change the vegetation structure. The very forest structure will change, the biodiversity will change. It could completely uproot the food chain and the ecosystem, causing severe environmental damage. So Lantana camara has been an environmental concern for India, as it is a invasive alien weed species. So repurposing the wood of the plant into these artifacts is one way of dealing with the rapid spread of this particular plant species, this weed species. Also, please note down, it is rated as the top 10 worst invasive species by IUCN. That's a very important point. There are different subspecies. In total, there are 600 varieties of Lantana camara, but IUCN has recognized this wooded plant as one of the 10 worst invasive weed species in the world. Next, there are two important government schemes on page 13. Please make a quick note. The Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs, headed by the Prime Minister, has approved a new scheme of around 1,200 crores through which self-help groups will be provided support. They will be provided financial support and even technical support to procure and operate drones which they can rent to farmers. Is that clear? Selected self-help groups under the Deen Dayal Antyodaya Yojana, which is a livelihood scheme, the government is focusing on uplifting women-led self-help groups. There are 89 lakh self-help groups registered under Deen Dayal Antyodaya Yojana. Out of these, women-led self-help groups will be chosen. They will be given financial assistance up to 8 lakh rupees to procure drones, commercially available drones. Government will even provide training, technical training to fly the drone, operate and maintain the drone. These women-led self-help groups can then rent the drones to farmers where they can use it for agricultural practices. That is to spray pesticides, fertilizers and nutrients. I hope you know that today drones are playing a big role in agriculture, in smart agriculture. So women-led SHGs are being encouraged to procure drones. Government will provide majority of the funding, with technical training on how to fly a drone, how to operate, how to maintain it. So these women self-help groups can build a drone fleet like a service provider, and they can provide these drones on rent to farmers who then can use them for spraying pesticides, fertilizers and nutrients to improve agricultural productivity. Next, another important government scheme, the Fast Track Special Court Scheme, has been extended for 3 more years. The Fast Track Special Court Scheme, it was launched in 2019 to speed up rape cases and sexual harassment and molestation cases, including charges filed under the POCSO Act. It was an initiative taken up after the horrific gang rape of Nirbhaya in Delhi. Is that clear? Following the Nirbhaya gang rape incident, there was an outrage in India. The Justice J.S. Verma committee was also set up to review the rape laws in India to enhance women's safety and security in India. As part of these efforts, the Criminal Law Amendment Act was enacted to provide more teeth to laws dealing with rape and sexual offences. So to speed up these trials and cases, to provide quick justice to the victims, fast track courts were set up under this scheme, which is a centrally sponsored scheme. Meaning partially it is funded by the central government. The central funding will come from the Nirbhaya Fund, which was created after the Nirbhaya gang rape incident. The remaining part of the funding comes from the concerned state governments. So under the scheme, in the last 5 years, several hundred fast-track special courts have been set up at the state level to speed up rape cases and sexual offences related cases. Now this critical scheme focused on women's safety and justice to rape victims has been extended for 3 more years. This will provide for speedy trials and speedy justice to the victims of rape and sexual offences. Next, on page 15, according to this article, Sri Lanka has reached a deal with its major creditors, that is India, the Paris Club, that includes Japan as well. As you know, Sri Lanka is facing a major economic crisis since last year. It defaulted on its foreign debt. It could not repay the massive foreign loans it had taken. It had come under a huge debt burden. So Sri Lanka has been trying to get a bailout package from the IMF, from the International Monetary Fund. The IMF has already provided an extended facility. It has provided an extended fund facility amounting to around $3 billion to bail out the Sri Lankan economy. But to further provide access to the bailout package, to further provide the financial assistance from the IMF, the condition is that Sri Lanka has to restructure its existing debt by striking a deal with its creditors. If IMF has to continue the extended fund facility, and if Sri Lanka has to continue having access to the bailout package, the $3 billion bailout package, it was mandatory for Sri Lanka to strike a loan restructuring deal. That is to defer the interest payment, the loan payment, and ensure that Sri Lanka will follow the terms of the loan. So this requires a deal with the creditors. So Sri Lanka has mainly borrowed from the international market through private borrowings, through market borrowings. It has also borrowed from major countries like India, Japan and China. Out of the total debt, 10% each comes from Japan and China, around 2% from India. So the IMF's condition was that to further provide the bailout package and ensure Sri Lanka has access to the funds, it had to strike a deal, a restructuring deal to restructure the loan with the creditor nations. So to restructure the loan for such countries, there is a grouping as well called the Paris Club. The Paris Club was formed in the year 1956. It includes all the OECD members. Mainly all the Western developed economies are part of it. From Australia to Japan to US, European countries, they are members of the Paris Club. The Paris Club is an informal group of creditor nations, meaning they would have given loans to smaller countries developing, underdeveloped countries. And if the borrowers face a crisis, if they face a debt burden, if they can't service the debt, then the Paris Club basically works out a restructuring of the loan. It creates a sustainable debt relief solution so the country can continue paying back and sustain its economy without leading to a full collapse and bankruptcy of that country's economy. That is the prime purpose of Paris Club. So Japan, which is one of the major lenders to Sri Lanka, is a member of the Paris Club. So Japan, the Paris Club and India, they have finally reached a deal with Sri Lanka to restructure the debt. That is the development being reported here. Understood? India is not a member of the Paris Club, but we work closely with Paris Club countries, and with Japan, India has worked out a restructuring deal to restructure Sri Lanka's loans. But however, China has not participated in the restructuring process. It's interesting to note that China has deliberately stayed away from the restructuring process. It has said it is bilaterally restructuring the loan with Sri Lanka, but it's widely believed that China is leveraging its debt influence on Sri Lanka. Large part of Sri Lanka's debt burden comes from China's predatory loans. And there is a fear in India, in US and other countries that China resorts to this debt trap diplomacy where it uses the debt trap, the debt burden, to force small countries to make strategic concessions, which will benefit China eventually. So even now, China is not part of the restructuring deal, but India, Japan, along with Paris Club, have finalized a restructuring process through which Sri Lanka will become eligible for more bailout funds from the IMF. Now coming to the last article today, on page number 16 in the economy section, we have an important article that refers to the 16th Finance Commission. Is that clear? The Government of India has notified the terms of reference for the 16th Finance Commission. Please note the Finance Commission is a constitutional body. It is established as per the provisions of Article 280 by the President of India. The Constitution mandates that every 5 years, President has to provide for the establishment of a Finance Commission. It consists of a chairman and 4 members. The qualification is decided by the Parliament. They are eligible for reappointment, and the tenure of the members and the chairman is as specified by the President. Now, once the Finance Commission is constituted, the terms of reference is prescribed by the government. The terms of reference of the Finance Commission primarily includes the distribution of the net tax proceeds between center and states. That is the devolution of funds out of the cumulative tax proceeds collected between center and states. A pool of divisible taxes exists where the center has to share that revenue with the state governments. To decide this devolution, to decide this percentage of devolution of funds where the net tax proceeds will be distributed to states, the recommendations come from the Finance Commission. And also the percentage of devolution for each state is recommended by the Finance Commission. So both vertical and horizontal devolution is recommended by the Finance Commission. Then the grants in aid given by the center to state governments is recommended by Finance Commission. Then the need to augment the consolidated fund of the state to bring more resources based on the panchayats and local bodies and what resources they have, depending on recommendations of the State Finance Commission. The Central Finance Commission provides recommendations to augment the resources of the state level bodies, that is the panchayats and municipal bodies, through the consolidated fund of the state, and based on State Finance Commission recommendations, the Central Finance Commission provides recommendations on how the resources of panchayats and local bodies can be augmented. It also deals with any other financial matter referred to it by the President. For example, disaster management funding. The assistance given by the center through the National Disaster Response Fund into the State Disaster Response Fund is also based on Finance Commission recommendations. Is that clear? The Finance Commission has the powers of a civil court, and the report is eventually tabled in the Parliament. However, the recommendations are only advisory, they're not binding on the government. The government can tweak the recommendations, and finally it will provide for the devolution of funds, and it will implement the other recommendations as well. So now the terms of reference for the new Finance Commission, the 16th Finance Commission, has been notified by the Union Cabinet. The recommendations have to be submitted by 31st October 2025. The government will look at the recommendations and finalize the terms, and then it will come into action for a 5-year period from 1st April 2026 till 2031. This will be the period for implementing the recommendations of the 16th Finance Commission. So please make a note of all these factual points. So this completes my detailed discussion of today's Hindu newspaper. I'm sure you guys have liked the session. You don't have to go back and read the newspaper again, right? If you feel the same, do let me know in the comments. Do press the like button and do subscribe to the channel. So please take up these questions for your answer writing practice, and also don't forget to join the Telegram channel because we have a quiz on these articles after the session. The link for both is provided in the description box below. So that is it for today. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.